Year of the Dragon is a controversial game, to put it lightly. After 2 games, Insomniac realized that there wasn't much left to do with Spyro, which is kind of ironic considering that when he was initially conceived, they made him into a dragon because of the vast variety of abilities he could do.
Because dragons can fly, they can run, they can flame, they can jump, they can do anything, and they're cool.
Perhaps that's a bit of a lack of foresight on their part. Thus, in order to adapt to these limitations, Insomniac provided a whole host of other gameplay styles, including new playable characters, different vehicles, and much more. Unfortunately, this has led Spyro 3 to garner a lot of criticism from the fanbase for having too many additions and not enough screen time for the titular character. In fact, people constantly argue which game was better, with a lot of the discussions going something close to this. I think Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon is the better game because it reduces the backtracking and it fixed a lot of problems from Spyro 2. Please, that piece of crap? Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage is obviously the better game because it's more focused on Spyro, and let's face it, Year of the Dragon has way too many gameplay styles and characters to play as, to the point that it felt very cluttered.
Spewing nonsense.
Yeah, I can
Absolute nonsense.
Come on, let's fight. Nonsense. Well, there is one thing we can agree on.
And what's that?
Enter the Dragonfly was absolute crap.
True.
So, does Spyro 3 do things worse than Spyro 2? Does the cluttered nature of the gameplay prevent it from being good? Well, if I were to give a bit of my own personal experience, this was the first game I've ever played. Perhaps that might affect how I see it. Now, granted, if I were to be honest, I did catch several problems that I didn't see when I was younger. I wouldn't say Spyro 3 is the worst. In fact, it's still my favorite. But perhaps my more mature outlook has allowed me to catch some flaws that I previously swept under the rug. So, a lot of people know the whole contention with the multiple playable characters being too much, but not too many people know the stories of Spyro 2 and 3 are also compared a lot too, particularly the villains. Quite a few people criticize the Sorceress for being a mean old bitch, while Ripto is a more charismatic villain. Well, to be fair, Ripto maybe had more interactions with Spyro compared to the Sorceress, but the latter proves to be more formidable by the simple fact she carries more dimensions. You see, we don't know what she initially wants to do with the eggs. Her plans aren't clear. She makes Bianca think that she needs the eggs for survival in order to bring about a small remnant of the magic the dragons left behind after their departure. However, it's revealed that she really wanted to use their wings to live forever. This form of ambiguity not only makes us hate the Sorceress all the more, but it also makes her an antagonist that's not so obvious. Granted, can you really see someone like this having good intentions? Ripto, as his loudmouth suggests, is far more obvious with the plan he wants to carry out. He simply wants to take over Avalar. And honestly, we don't really see him do anything except throw out money bags, change a few flags, and try to feed Zoe to Gulp. There's nothing special with Ripto's character. He has charisma through Greg Berger's performance, but there's no subtlety. He's just loud. Really loud. But for what purpose? The problems get even worse when you look at how they involve themselves into levels. Similar to Spyro 2, Year of the Dragon tries to have each of the NPCs go through some kind of problem. While it takes away the charming cutscene in the beginning, Year of the Dragon does improve over one aspect, and that's the simple fact the Sorceress is behind a lot of the levels' problems. The same can't be said for Ripto. The conflict between the Land Blubbers and Breeze Builders isn't clearly caused by him. It's an interesting way to combine the levels, but without Ripto, the stakes aren't as big. The small addition of the Sorceress and her Rhinoc army being responsible for the mishaps of the worlds makes her have a bit more of a presence. So even though Spyro never interacts with the Sorceress, you can see the destruction she's caused, which makes her a credible threat. The fact Ripto isn't like this kind of just makes him an obnoxious dinosaur causing cacophony. I wonder why Alara was so worried about him when the residents barely make a mention of him. However, all that being said, perhaps there is one criticism I can agree on, and that's the shafting of Spyro. Now, Insomniac Games added a whole new cast of characters to take up the screen time, and because of this, Spyro doesn't feel like he's the main star of the show. In a way, I think most of the character development goes to Bianca and Hunter. But this isn't called Hunter Year of the Dragon, is it? No, this is supposed to be Spyro's story, and instead of exploring a potentially blooming relationship with Allura, like what was being set up in Spyro 2, they instead decided to omit her from the game and have Hunter fall in love instead. Watching Bianca change from villain to ally through Hunter is probably the most character development I've seen in a Spyro game, but Spyro just feels like he's a side observer in all of this. The same could be said of the other characters, as they all are very likable. Sheila is a tough-as-nails kangaroo that doesn't play too nicely when her allies are in danger. Sergeant Bird is a military Arile penguin that is always ready to take orders and speaks as if he's a trained commando placed in the front lines. Bentley is a compassionate Yeti despite his brutish physique, and Agent 9 is a crazy space monkey that isn't afraid to get a little dirty with his laser blaster. Insomniac was very creative with how they made these characters, and it's very cathartic watching each of them have their own comical ways of beating up moneybags. But they don't feel like they really supplement Spyro's role in the story. It's true that we're reminded Spyro is the main character by how the sorceress pesters Bianca to destroy him, but there's a big difference between showing and telling. Here, Year of the Dragon is simply telling us that Spyro is the main character, without showing the details of how that's the case. But what's also unique about the narrative is how it expands onto Spyro lore. The Forgotten Realms doesn't feel like some random place like Avalar, and actually has some relationship to the dragons in the sense that this was their old home. This even bleeds into the gameplay, since the way they explain why some of the portals don't work is because the dragons' magic has been waning since they left. However, by the endgame, the baby dragons are all transferred back up to the Dragon Realms, and to me, that's the biggest problem. It would have been a lot more satisfactory if all the dragons returned to the Forgotten Realms. The plot twist that the dragons used to inhabit the area before the sorceress banished them is definitely an interesting one, but it doesn't go anywhere. Once the sorceress is gone and defeated, then the dragons should feel better about moving back where they came from, but no such plot point exists. It's little things like this that makes me wonder if Spyro Year of the Dragon was rushed to a certain extent. It was a good plot point to make the Forgotten Worlds the dragons' old home, but the natural conclusion is to have them move back, so this point is incomplete. So at the end of the day, the story is an improvement over Ripto's Rage. The sorceress is a better villain because she actually affects the realms compared to Ripto. There is more evident character development and world building, but at the same time, there are a lot of missed opportunities, like the potential relationship that could have blossomed with Allura. I mean, she actually blows a little kiss to him at the end of Spyro 2. Surely that should have gone somewhere. But of course, if we were to go into the belly of the beast in regards to Spyro 3 controversies, it's the multiple playstyles it introduces, in which Year of the Dragon has a lot of them. The first additional style is the skateboarding levels. These have Spyro doing tricks before time runs out, killing lizards without wiping out, and racing against Rhinox. Overall, I think it's the most refined of all the gameplay modes, because it actually requires you to get good. A lot of the skill points have Spyro reaching a threshold to acquire a high score, which requires there to be full mastery of using the skateboard. Maybe it's not what I think of when it comes to dragons, but its implementation makes this one of the more welcome additions. Sadly, I couldn't say the same in regards to the submarine. The lock-on system takes too long to focus on its enemies. It especially got really aggravating when the enemies started to leave behind mines in the ocean, so it was harder to tail them. I must say that even in the super bonus round, it got really difficult because one of the enemy subs tended to make a lot of tight turns, so it took a while to focus on them. And then you have things like the hovercraft tanks and such. These felt way too janky to control, which made the minigame at Haunted Tomb too frustrating because of how slow you moved. However, on the other hand, you had minigames like the one where you went toe-to-toe with Bluto the Shark, and that was well done mainly because the navigation didn't feel as clunky. I really hate how they made you fight the sorceress in this thing. I mean, was Insomniac just so proud of the turret sections that they thought it would be a good idea to implement this into the final boss? So yeah, pretty much a lot of these vehicles, more or less, are a hit or miss. The skateboarding felt very well executed, the submarine was functional but felt like work, and I mean work with a capital W, and deterrent vehicles probably shouldn't have been there in this game to begin with. Just, why did they make you fight the final boss like this? Just, why? But while we're on the topic of minigames, Year of the Dragon sort of takes a different approach with them. I know a lot of people complain they don't feel as seamlessly interwoven into the main world because of how they can only be accessed through portals, and this is very much true, but Year of the Dragon makes up for this by providing more creative minigames. One of them has Spyro battling 2 Zodiac dragons in Fireworks Factory with the Super Flame and Glide. It feels like something otherworldly, and it's hard to describe the feeling of chasing other dragons while flying through corridors. Considering that the dragons regenerate over time, it forces you to reevaluate your approach to take them out as fast as possible. Spyro 2's level Metropolis sort of had something similar with the sheep saucers, but fighting against the Zodiac dragons takes it to a whole new level. Another creative one was where you had to defend Nancy the ballerina from Rhinoc hockey players. In a way, it's kind of like a more creative version of the Alchemist minigame from Spyro 2's Fracture Hills, except instead of trying to protect a scientist from stone golems, you're trying to keep up with a dancer to prevent hockey players from swatting her. It's like Insomniac took what Ripto's Rage offered and made it into something new by making the scenario more interesting. But perhaps Insomniac mixed it up a bit too much when it came to the other characters. Now, I didn't hate playing as these guys. They were functional, but they all had one fundamental issue that kept them from being truly great. Sheila the Kangaroo is known for being able to jump really high and kick her enemies. However, the area where she fails is the fact that her high jump doesn't cover enough distance as it does height, so it does feel a bit stiff when platforming. Although, this is such a small issue that it didn't take much away from her gameplay. Sergeant Bird focuses a lot on aerial combat with his ability to fly and fire homing rockets. The main issue with him is that his ascension and descending is slow and floaty. Therefore, it made it hard to dodge attacks from enemies. Now, granted, his rockets do home in on foes, but slow mobility arguably made Sergeant Bird the worst character to play as. I guess I'd criticize Bentley for the same thing, but it didn't feel as bad. Maybe because you didn't need the precision of dodging. As Sly 2 tried to demonstrate with Murray, bulky characters can have fast movement, and maybe this could have been done with Bentley the Yeti, but I didn't find myself struggling to play as him, at least compared to Sergeant Bird. Maybe it's because a lot of his levels involve him whacking stuff and not platforming, so despite the fact he has a short jump, it doesn't matter as much. Other than that, he doesn't have any features that interfered with his playstyle like Sergeant Bird, so Bentley at the very least felt serviceable. As for Agent 9, he plays much better than the latter two, but has the fundamental flaw of not being able to strafe while shooting. This isn't really a big problem, because there's never a time the game puts you in a mob fight, and when it does, it's usually in the form of an FPS. So, it's not as awkward to control. Furthermore, the lasers bounce off the walls, which makes it somewhat easier to hit different enemies in one shot. You really can see how he was a precursor to Ratchet & Clank, with how his gameplay involves him using weaponry like guns and bombs. And last but not least, you have Sparks and Hunter. Okay, when I said Sergeant Bird was the worst, I lied. Sparks turns too sharply, so it was really hard to properly shoot at enemies. As for Hunter, his levels mostly have him controlling a vehicle to fight space sheep. These are as good as the side challenges from Spyro 2, but really? Space sheep? Feels kind of a random thing for Hunter to fight. So a lot of people complain that these characters intrude upon Spyro's gameplay, but I'd argue that we don't see enough of them. The fact that they're only featured in minigame portals doesn't allow them to properly spread their wings. I like the one area where you get to explore the Enchanted Towers as Sergeant Bird because it offered a brand new perspective of the whole level. Each of these characters could have had one more level besides their main one to supplement them. If there's one complaint, it's the types of scenarios these guys were put in. Guiding the Fireflies as Sheila was hard because they went in very weird directions, and boxing with Bentley felt arduous because of how it forced me to adapt to something that wasn't a part of his core gameplay. These minigames felt restrictive, and giving the characters another actual level to play in would have made them feel more fully fledged out, instead of them merely being relegated to only side content and helping out with the bosses. And oh boy, were the bosses more of a step backwards this time around, especially compared to Crush, Gulp, and Ripto. Buzz just has you doing the same thing of trying to charge him off the arena. He basically deals no damage except when he tries to spew flames at you, which are easy to jump over, and when he tries to roll over you, which is pretty easy to outrun. Spike has a lot of similarities to Gulp, with how he tries to crush you and to shoot projectiles, and you have to rely on your own firepower to take him out. It's a little worse than Gulp because sometimes flames pop up out of the arena as he breaks the ground, so you can't charge in a complete circle to avoid him. Scorch has you using bullets and rockets to fight him while he lays eggs that unleashes his own minions. Overall, this one isn't so bad except for the fact that he himself doesn't attack much. It's mostly the TNTs and crabs that do the work for him. Thankfully, bosses only take up a very minimal part of the game, for there are a lot of things in the main Spyro gameplay Year of the Dragon improves upon. That's right, if I was sounding kind of mixed in the last section, here's where I start to get more positive. Simple changes like the enemies going back to releasing gems instead of spirits fixed a major issue of having to kill all of them again just to unlock a power-up gate a second time when returning to a level. As a matter of fact, Spyro 3 reduces the backtracking by a lot. The only time where this was absolutely necessary was when you needed to free a character to do a minigame. However, the times where this was the case was very few and minimal, especially if you already had the specific character already unlocked in their respective homeworlds. If I were to give a recommendation on how to play Spyro 3, always free the character from moneybags first before doing any of the levels. It really reduces the amount of times you have to go back to an area, and it makes for a much smoother 100% run. If you want me to be honest, Spyro 3 takes the best things about Spyro 2 and the original and combines it together. The sense of exploration is still there from Spyro 1, as some of the eggs are in difficult to reach areas. Maybe it's nothing like chasing the thieves in treetops, but it does make you do more exploring within the crooks and crannies. They even bring back collecting the keys to open the locked chests. At the same time, the skill points, helping an NPC in need, the minigames, and other elements from Spyro 2 are present here. In a way, I could describe Year of the Dragon as a celebration of Spyro himself. Insomniac knew that this was going to be the last crack they ever get at working on the Purple Dragon, so they wanted to end it without any regrets. Was it bad that they added so many styles that had so many people complaining? Maybe, but in a way, through this, they were able to find their idea of what they wanted to do next, which was Ratchet & Clank through the concept of Agent 9. If there's anything that Year of the Dragon represents, it was that Spyro was just running out of juice. Insomniac thought they had it all figured out in the first game, but by the third game, there was only so much they could do with a quadruped. Considering what we saw with the future of the series, perhaps it's good that Insomniac laid the Purple Dragon to rest. The epilogue really couldn't have said farewell any better. So yes, Year of the Dragon is certainly a controversial title, but it's one where controversy was warranted in order for Insomniac to bring closure to their primary franchise at the time and absolve the future. Plus, this is the only game in the series where you can give Moneybags the pounding he's always deserved. Seriously, of all the things I mentioned, this is what makes Spyro 3 superior to its predecessor. Well, I don't want to drag this out any longer than it should be, so I'm Dave Reviews, thanks for watching, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.